Welcome, lifelong learners and edupreneurs. I'm Paul Porter here with my buddy Mark Nelson. How you doing, Mark?
Doing well, Paul.
Good to have
Thanks.
you here.
Thanks.
We're here to chat a little bit. This week's module had to do with risk and risk-taking, so we want to talk to you a little bit about some concepts of risk. One thing we want to do is check in with you. One of your assignments this week was to find some ways for yourself or your students, if you're a teacher, to encourage risk-takings. I think we had one person write in, Mark, who said they were playing around with the idea of making an assignment to their students that to write about or talk about when has risk really made a difference in your life? When has it changed things a little bit? Maybe we could comment on that ourselves. When has risk made a difference to you, Mark?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is back in 1988 when I made a decision to leave the CPA and professional services world. I'd been at Price Waterhouse for 3 years, and my father had engaged me and said, "Look, Mark, I want to start a new business, and I'd like you to be the front man for it." And basically, I went from an auditor on a Friday to a sales guy on a Monday. The good news is I had a kind of a natural propensity for storytelling and legitimate consultative storytelling. And
you still tell stories.
I try to. And also, sitting down behind a desk crunching numbers all day long really didn't fit my personality. So it worked really well. I do have to say this, though. There were times when that risk was in question, and I did a lot of self-introspection. And I think in one of the videos I alluded to earlier, and I'm not sure exactly which video it was, I had an epiphany on an elevator about whether I had really made the right decision about moving from an auditor to a sales guy. And that epiphany was, look, Mark, you're thinking about what you can get out in the business world. You're thinking about whether you can get a job order, whether you can get a candidate a job, whether you can get business. And the reality was my mind was all kind of screwed up. And so risk really transitioned and changed that day because I went from thinking about what I could get to what I could give to somebody. And the reality was every single person I met, whether they were a potential client or a potential candidate, I could either help them find a person for their company or I could help somebody find a job. And that shift in thought process was a life changer. And it really changed the thought process of risk because when I thought about what I could give to people, it's a lot less risky than when you think about what you can get from people. So that's probably one, and then there have been a number of others, but that's the one that really was a game changer for me professionally.
I think of my transition from, I was a school administrator and various school capacities in the public school system for almost 30 years. My big risk was deciding to enter and become a professor. And just to tell you how dysfunctional I am, I agonized over that decision for months, turned in an application, withdrew it. And the thing that made the difference for me is getting more in touch with what my purpose was. Mm-hmm. Once I kind of relaxed and said, these are the things that I really value, it became clear to me that I could do those in different settings. I've always said that I could lose my job. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but I could lose my job next week and become a waiter, and I could still, knowing what some of my core purposes are, what I really value, I could put those to work in most any kind of position. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the key that settled me down, because I'm not a huge risk taker, I don't think, but through that I learned be in touch with your core values.
Well, and I think you learn about risk mitigation, because the reality is anytime you take a risk, it could turn out, it could go south. And the reality is that the great way to mitigate risk is that if it does go south, you're going to be okay. It's not whether you're not betting the farm. You're betting a few cattle, for lack of a better metaphor. You're not betting the farm. A few ears of corn. And I think
enough.
Okay. So I think that's really what risk is about. Is that if it fails, you're not going to be bankrupt, whether it be relationally, spiritually, socially, financially, all the other portfolio buckets that we'll talk about. I think it's next week.
That are really you.
Yeah, really you.
We got some questions this week too about taking risks when there are a lot of resistors around, or when the system resists, or it's very difficult to make change even when you're convinced of it yourself, when there are a lot of naysayers. So maybe we can make a few comments about that. I think one thing Mark and I talked about was the basis of most change in systems is rooted in trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you have to, when you have resistors, you have to assess and determine whether it's ideological resistance or whether it's trust and credibility resistance. Because when it's trust and credibility resistance, that's really tough to overcome. I mean, there's been people in my own life where there wasn't a level of trust and confidence or credibility, and regardless of what you do, you're more than likely not going to overcome them. With that said, if it's an ideological resistor, you can sit down and have a communication about it, and you can have a dialogue, and if there's trust and credibility, the hope is that you can come to some level of happy medium, you can come to some level of agreement, some level of direction that will allow for a formidable conclusion and a good conclusion. Because as we know, life isn't as black and white as we'd all like it to be. And resistors are going to be there. We're getting resistors about some of our concepts. Economic unit of one is one that's been dabbled around quite a bit, and I think dagged around. We love it, yeah. And we're getting good stuff. And it's given us a really thought-provoking opportunity, and it's given us an opportunity to think about whether it's the best phrase. On the other hand, the fact that it's provoked thought and discussion and discourse to me means that, hey, maybe it is the right terminology, because then we understand why we're doing it.
Yeah. This whole issue of trust reminds me of new professionals, new managers, new entrepreneurs. I've dealt with a lot of new leader type people who have amazing ideas, and they go into the system and they try to implement their ideas. And in most cases, in my judgment, they are intellectually correct. Yet they're very frustrated that they can't get the ideas across to people, or that people don't immediately fall at their feet and implement those ideas. So again and again, when I do coaching with with executives and leaders, this whole issue that you got to work on trust and culture first. There's a saying by an author, Anthony Mohammed. He says that culture eats structure for breakfast every single time. So the thing I've maybe to remind people about as young entrepreneurs, young leaders, you have to pay attention to trust. Your intellect will be trumped every time by lack of trust.
Well, and when the process and the administration become the primary focuses of an organization or an institution, that's when you really get in trouble. The outputs are sometimes forgotten. Risk-taking is not only is it not encouraged, but it's discouraged, and creativity is then stifled. And I think that if you look at history over the course of time, we're going through some sort of an institutional revolution. We're looking at government in a different way. We're looking at public education in a different way. We're looking at large corporations in a different way. And those that encourage risk and those that encourage some level of innate creativity and innate input, for lack of a better words, are the ones that are thriving. Yeah. The ones that are getting chewed up and spit out are the ones where the practice, again, of administration and approval and all this kind of control and hierarchy. If you look at the greatest organizations around, they're flattening. They become increasingly mobile, for a lack of a better word, but a word that's used quite a bit. And they create different kinds of opportunity. Creates opportunities to learn, to become diverse, to challenge, and again, I've seen it in some cases in the university systems where the process itself becomes more important than the outputs, and that's an area of opportunity for not just in California but for the United States.
Okay. Yeah. In regards to risk, I think we had some comments. Mark, you and I were talking later about this. If you really want to make change, you want to be a successful change agent, a successful innovator, the ability to both look at narrow and broad focus at the same time. It seems like a paradox, yeah, but I think it's important.
Yeah, and Jeff Ubben spoke eloquently about this.
He did.
Go deep, understand who you are, learn all that you can about your craft, about your discipline. In his case, he's in the investment business, but he stays true to his formula, which is, look, I'm going to focus on value-based companies. I'm going to do a lot of data analysis. I'm going to understand the marketplaces they're in, but I'm basically going to go in for undervalued companies. There's other investors who go into growth companies. They believe that Twitter or Facebook is going to ultimately grow into their numbers. There's others that go into specific industries and they become industry experts. He is a value-based investor. He understands the risks associated with it. He's a master at the data and the analytics, as are his partners in the company, and he sticks to what is true. Now, with that said, he's also one of the a friend of mine that has a broad perspective and a myriad of interests. He's traveled the world. He's invested, he's participated in not-for-profits and philanthropy. He's an avid sports fan. He stays in good shape. He's a family guy. So he's got this broadness, but when it comes to the discipline of what he's going to deliver from a risk-reward perspective, very narrow.
Maybe we could think about that for our viewers too, a little bit in educational area too. My wife and others are working with some people now in the maker movement, very popular in education. The ability of those people to narrowly focus on the amazing opportunities of hands-on education, of involvement, is part of what makes that movement so passionate and successful. At the same time, those people are very much in touch with the overall concept of education, where it fits in the system, change. How do you get kids involved? So it's, again, I think maybe in an educational sense, an example of a narrow and yet broad focus at the same time.
If you use a sports metaphor, Jerry Rice, arguably the greatest receiver in all time, knew how to run a route. He's kept his body in impeccable shape. He knew where Joe Montana or Steve Young was going to throw the football. He could block downfield. He really understood what he was doing as a receiver. Now, with that said, he also understood football, as he knew what the quarterbacks were supposed to do. He knew what the blockers were supposed to do, but he wasn't a blocker himself. He didn't need to understand, I should say that an offensive lineman, although he understood some of it, he didn't understand the intricacies of it. So there's a perfect example of somebody who's got a real narrow focus, real narrow deliverable, but understands the overall concepts of the game to make his narrow focus even more effective.
I think that's consistent too with the strengths movement. What we're kind of working on the strength movement is stop worrying about being a generalist and spending your whole life focusing on the 3 things you can't do well. Start focusing on the things where you're really passionate and you really excel, and the growth, not just in that area, but overall, is going to be a lot greater.
Well, it's funny that, the underlying theme of relevant purpose is unleashing your inner passions and your inner purpose, your unique purpose in this world. And I think when you do that and you really focus on it, it starts over the course of time integrating into some of your weaknesses are. It starts overcoming them. In fact, you will find ways to bridge the gap between those strengths and those weaknesses, and what you become holistically is a better, stronger person with a healthier life portfolio, with a stronger economic unit of one, with a happier, more fulfilling life, because relevant purpose is expanding, it's blossoming, it's growing, it's cultivating, and as I said in other sessions, it's harvesting. And so, yeah, focus on what you're good at. Make sure that soil is in good shape, and hey, then over the course of time, if you find yourself mastering one agricultural element, you find yourself moving into some other areas.
Stacy, any other questions you think we need to address here that have come up? Or Mark, can you recall any from that?
I'm just looking up on the board here. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think we got it. Jeff Ubben did a great job in that clip.
Good. Well, maybe our next module,
Portfolio.
Building a life portfolio.
Building a life portfolio, which I know we're pretty darn excited about.
Yeah.
So we'd urge you to tune in for that.
Yep. So at SSU Startup, come tweet, please. We're still tweeting. And at Mark Nelson. And what are you again? Can you ever remember? No, at Paul Porter, some number.
At Paul Porter 64 or something like that.
No, it's more numbers than that.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, it's somewhere. If you tweet me, you can probably find him.
Thank you for listening. We look forward to your continued participation.
Thanks a lot. Have a good week.